This is Gemara Baba Basra, Daf Pei Beis, and all the learning of the month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored as the Schos Aliyas Nishama for Aster Rizal Basra מאיר B'siyata Dishmaya. The learning of the entire Chabura should bring Aster Rizal Basra מאיר to a higher place in Gan Eden Shalmayla, Schos HaTeira Talmud Teira Kenegei Kulam, and ultimately be a Milatz Yosher on her entire family. Rolling on Beibezim and Aleph for 6 lines down to the 2 dots, which the Gemara quotes the din of the Mishnah. We're in the middle of discussing that when one sells a tree, at what level the land is sold with the tree, and all the other pertaining dinim. So said the Mishnah, Higdilu Loi Yishabeh. If the tree grows, the seller is not able to cut back the tree. And then the Mishnah explained that there's a difference between that which grows to the trunk and that which grows from the roots. That which grows to the trunk, explains the Mishnah, belongs to the buyer, whereas that which goes from the roots is going to belong to the seller, as the seller is retaining rights to the karka, and therefore the roots are included in that. Says the Gemara, what is the case of the trunks and what is the case of the roots? Meaning, at what precise point is it considered the gaza and when is it considered the sharashim? Amar Rav Yochanan, kol sharaya pnei achama zeh min gaza. Any part of the tree that sees the sunlight, it's on top of the ground, that is called the trunk. She'ena raya pnei achama zehu sharashim. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why are we not worried? That maybe the soil will build up around the roots, and therefore now the roots will no longer be able to see the Pnei Achama. Vamarlei, and then the buyer is going to say, Tulasa Zavint Ali Vesli Aro. You sold me 3 trees and I have the rights to land. Ask the Gemara that if the land the soil builds up, can make it, you have a tree. And growing out of the tree, you have another shoot. The land builds up in between, making it look like here's a shoot and here's a tree, making it look like 2 disparate items, 2 separate items. And then the buyer is going to say, hey, look, I really bought 3 trees, and therefore I get the land in between them. So says the Gemara, Ela Amar Rav Nachman, the first one line is Ela Yakutz. The Mishnah means you have to cut down the tree, you have to cut down any other shoots involved in order to avoid this issue that it's going to look like separate items. Says the Gemara, and Rav Yochanan said, Yakutz, you have to cut down any of the shoots to make sure that it doesn't look like they are separate trees. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman. Says Rav Nachman, I'll tell you a special rule. Nakitinan, dekel ein lo geza. In the Mishnah, we learned this chalik between that which grows from the geza, that which grows from the sharashim. Says Rav Nachman, a dekel tree, a date palm tree, there's no trunk lehalach. Says the Gemara, Savar Rav Zil Neymar. So if Zvid thought, you know what this means? Ein lo geza ba'al dekel. What this means is that the owner of the dekel, the buyer, has no rights to the has no rights to the trunk. Why? Because a date palm tree, not like other trees, what do you usually do with it? You dig it out and you uproot it after it dries up. Therefore, so Rav Zvid thought that you know what the practical ramification of this ruling of Rav Nachman is? That the dekel tree does not have a geza because a dekel, when it's dying, usually is removed, it's cut up. Therefore, the buyer doesn't actually think he's going to get anything from the geza, from the trunk. And that's the reason why a dekel ain't lo geza. But if that's true, mascular apapa, v'kadosh neilanois. Ask Rapapa, I don't understand. We learned in the Mishnah, kadosh neilanois, if someone buys 2 trees, Where, let's say, of those two trees, one of them is a decal tree, and therefore they're going to be uprooted, they're going to be dug up. Yet what does the Mishnah say? The Yeshla Geza. The Mishnah does not differentiate in such a manner. So ask Rav Papa, how can you, Rav Zvid, explain Rav Nachman that when he says decal ein lo geza, that because it's going to be uprooted, therefore the owner abandons it? From the Mishnah, we don't see that. Ela Rav Papa, 5 lines from the bottom, ein lo geza, you know what it means? It means that there's no geza, there's no trunk, libal dekel. It means to the Baal Dekel, the buyer has no rights that which grows from the trunk. Why? Because usually a Dekel tree does not grow anything from the trunk. And why not? Because the Mitzias, the science is that the Dekel, it grows from the top, doesn't grow from the bottom. And therefore, that's the reason why the buyer does not get the rights to the trunk. Whereas when our Mishnah says that the buyer does, that's because it's discussing cases in which it does grow from the trunk. Says the Gemara, Rav Zvid, Kasha Masnisan. According to Rav Zvid, it comes out the Mishnah Ishver. Says the Gemara, according to Rav Zvid, it's not sure, because Rav Zvid could explain that our Mishnah would include a decal tree, but it's talking about a case where he sold it for a minimum of 5 years. And then in that case, even Rav Nachman, even though Rav Nachman is teaching us naktin on dekel ein lo geza, but if you bought it for 5 years, then Rav Nachman would be maskim. We continue quoting the next part of the Mishnah, Kana Shleisha, Kana Kark. Said the Mishnah that if you buy 3 trees, then you do indeed get the karka between the trees. Says the Gemara, Vikama. Says the Gemara, and how much land does he acquire? Rav Chiva Rabbam Rav Yechanan. Harezeh kana tachteihen ubeineihen vechutz alahen. Says Rav Chiva Rabbam Rav Yechanan. The buyer gets the land underneath the trees, between the trees, as well as vechutz alahem, and around the trees. All the basically associate lands to the tree is that which the buyer gets. We turn over to Beis Amid Beis. Says the Gemara, in how much of that land? He gets the land. How much? So says the Gemara, you know how much? Kimale Oira Visala. He gets the amount of land enough for someone who is picking fruit, enough that he can walk with his basket and pick his fruit, because you have to be able to walk. That's the whole reason you get the karka. So that's how much land you get next to him, between the trees, etc. Maskiv la Rav Elazar, as Rav Elazar on the top line of Beis Amid Beis. Hashta derech ein lo yover sali yishloi. Derech ein lo derech riti. Yover sali yishloi, and tell me he gets a basket. So Rav Elazar doesn't understand how a basket for the picker to pick the fruit is not as intrinsic as being able to walk there. So how can you tell me that the buyer is going to get the basket? So Amar Rav Zera, before we answer the kasha, first Rav Zera comments the following. Amar Rav Zera midivrei Rabbeinu Nelman. Says Rav Zera, from the words of Rabbeinu, of Rav Elazar, we can learn Shleisha Hudin Loi Derech, that when someone buys 3 trees, that's when he does not get a derech. Why? Because when you buy 3 trees, it's not called his land, only the land between the trees. Therefore, he doesn't get the derech. Hashnayim Yeshloi. But if he buys 2 trees, then he does get a derech. Tamar lei baradidach kaimi. Why? Because when he buys 2 trees, then the buyer could say that my trees are in your field, and therefore, if I get the trees, of course I get the derech to get there. But Amar Rav Nachman Rava, answering up the kasha. Excuse me. So Amar Rav Nachman Rava, Lema Rav Elazar Leslie de Shmuel Rabbe. If the way that you just extrapolated from Rav Elazar, based on what you, Rav Zera, just said, let's do some math. Comes out that Rav Elazar is arguing on his own Rebbe. Why? Tamar Shmuel, because Shmuel says 10 lines down, the first one line is Tamar Shmuel, Ach Kravi Kiva. Tamar Meichabayin Yafeh Meicher, bring us back to Machlekes we had about a week ago. Says Shmuel, we pass like Rabbi Kiva, then Meichabayin Yafeh Meicher, which means that when you sell 3 trees, you, yes, get the derech, the access to get to the field. But it comes out that according to Rav Elazar, you do not get the derech. So he's arguing on his own Rebbe. Amar Lei. So Rav responds to Rav Nachman Yitzchak, no. Loi. Mitugma Masnisa Rav Kiva. Rav Elazar felt that you cannot explain the Mishnah according to Rav Kiva, and therefore he said, explained it according to the Chachamim, the Moicher, Bayin Ra, Moicher. Rav Elazar himself, Avada, he holds like the Rebbe, like Shmuel, like Rav Kiva, Moicher, Bayin Yafe, Moicher. In our Mishnah, he felt like he had no other way of explaining, and that's why he explained it according to the Chachamim, the Moicher, Bayin Ra, Moicher. Mimai, what's the reason that Rav Elazar felt that this is the only way to explain the Mishnah? Midiktani Higdilu Yishape. For the fact that the Mishnah says, if you bought 3 trees, that the seller's allowed to cut it down. If you're going to tell me it's Rav Kiva, what is the reason that the seller has to trim down the trees? And therefore, the seller should get the area that the trees overgrew into the other's field. So why does he have to trim it down? For the fact that we see that he trims it down shows us that we're not going with Meicher Bayin Yaf Meicher, says the Gemara. Therefore, we're going with Shitas Chachamim. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman Yitzchak says no. Rav Kiva. When did Rav Kiva say Meicher Bayin Yaf Meicher? Gabi Barvedos Lo Mechashiyara. It's only by a pit, a cistern, a well that doesn't ruin the land. However, Gabi Elon Mishamislei. How do you know in the first place that he owes Meicher Bayin Yaf Ben Meicher in this case? No. Mila Meidir Rav Kiva Bilan Anaitel Teich Sadach Haveiroi. Does Rav Kiva not agree that if you have branches of a tree that are going into a neighbor's field, you're allowed to cut down the area, the height, so the ox can walk underneath it? Of course he does. What's the reason? Because even though he knows normally that's only in entities that's not going to weaken the land, but over here it will, and therefore Rav Elazar will be Rav Kiva's masking with the Chachamim that at this level we do not say Moicher Bayin Yafe Moicher. Says the Gemara, now that we've established that it's not arguing with Rav Kiva, because the case of a Sada is going to be a different case. Tanya Kavase Rav Chia Barabba. Let's go back to something that we started off the day with, a raya to Rav Chia Barabba that says, Harizeh Kana Tachteyem V'chutzalahem Kemali Oyrav Esali. Bryce says, just like Rav Chia Barabba, that how much land do you get when you buy your 3 trees? You get enough land. You get enough land for the person picking to walk with his basket to pick the trees. Says Abaye to Rav Yosef, who is allowed to plant those areas? You tell me he's allowed to walk there with his basket, but who has the rights to physically put vegetation down in that areas? Amar Le, Rav Yosef responds to Nitua. It's a Mishnah. The outside guy has the rights to seed the path. And therefore, in our case, the buyer has the right to use the land outside his trees. So he just could use it, but the seller is going to be the one that could still plant there. Amar Le, Abaye says, no raya, mi dami, asam, unless they say the lokeach. Over there, there's no loss. Avalacha, islay, say the lokeach. Why? Because the lokeach could say that the fruit are getting soiled. Why? Because when the fruit falls off the tree and now there's seeds in the ground, it's going to mess up the fruit. So you can't necessarily bring a raya, because in this case, you can mess up the fruit that falls. This is comparable to the seifa of that Mishnah that says, no one's allowed to plant in that area. That's going to be the case over here. That's just going to be an area that the picker could walk with his basket, but no one can physically plant in that area. We conclude with the Brisa, and the Brisa explicates mamish what we just said. No one is able to do it. And finally, the Gemara says, and how much how much area between the trees do you need for this halacha to apply? Me'arbama said Shemaina, from 4 to 8 amos. Rav Amar, I'm not going to remember Shemaina Vachish Esrei, from 8 to 16. We're going to stop over here and we'll pick up from this area between the trees to get this amount of allowance for the picker to walk with his basket. The next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.